Welcome back to the second of our Prologue discussion series videos that we're doing before the system gets installed. And this is probably going to be the second to last of these Prologue videos. Yesterday I actually wound up filming a short Prologue video for next week that has the gentleman from Sunworks, a couple gentlemen from Sunworks coming over to kind of walk you through a little bit of the install and show the two Powerwall batteries that we actually have currently. We're told that the first week in August, this coming week, that they should be getting an allocation of 10 Powerwalls. So we should be getting ready to start this month. So that's pretty good. This discussion series, for those that are just seeing this as the first video, I'm taking a look at some of the replies that we've been having to the videos that we have up already, and kind of formulating, formulating what questions people tend to be asking repeatedly, or what statements they tend to be making repeatedly. Was more the case of this video. So the title of this video was actually prompted by my mother enjoying boiled eggs and having her egg cooker burn out. So let's get right into it. This is prompted by a repeat series of comments, questions, more comments, I think, more of a comment than a question, about tax incentives and tax rebates. And what becomes pretty clear is that I don't think these folks understand what a tax incentive or a tax rebate is, or how it works. So I'm going to start off by showing how that deals with egg cookers. So there are three basic ways that you and I spend money. We spend our own money on ourselves, we spend our own money on other people, or sometimes we spend other people's money on ourselves. Okay, well, there is a fourth way that money gets spent, and I'll get into that last. But here I'm going to pull up a picture of a couple of egg cookers. So now what you'll see is that we have a egg cooker on the right, mostly cheap plastic, less than $20. And we have an egg cooker on the left, stainless steel, $40. One on the right, not name brand. One on the left, name brand. All right, well, so the egg cooker on the right was a housewarming gift that a friend of my mother gave her. It's important to remember that it's a gift. We'll get into that in a second. Well, that egg cooker, when I first fired it up, stank to high heaven. The plastic was cheap, had to run it several times before it would even stop stinking enough to actually cook eggs. And then after that, it cooked eggs a couple of times and then it burned out. So what's important to remember about those first three ways that we spend money is that when you spend your own money on yourself, you're really engaged in what happens with that money. You are careful with how much you spend, and you want to maximize the value of what you get. Well, when you spend your money on somebody else, egg cooker, you aren't terribly concerned with what you get for your money, but you are concerned with what you spend. So you wind up with a non-brand name cheap plastic egg cooker. And so then finally, if you get the opportunity to spend somebody else's money on yourself, well, then maybe you find that you're not too terribly concerned with how much it costs, but you are concerned with the value of the item that you get for that money. All right. Now, the fourth way that money gets spent is the way that government spends money. Government spends other people's money on somebody else. They're completely detached. That's why you wind up with these crazy government programs that have no oversight whatsoever. And you wind up with the government not even be able to put up their own web page. Really? So the thing to drive home here about tax incentives is that when you give tax incentives for something that the government wants people to do anyway, you wind up getting the best return on that investment, if you will. All right. Now, it's also important to remember that at that point, the person hasn't paid money. It's not money that the government has that then is being misdirected into some weird way where you're not, you as a citizen of the U.S. or whatever country you're in, don't get your money's worth. The tax incentives, you have to qualify for them. You already have to pay a certain amount of tax, and then all the government is saying is that if you spend that money in a beneficial way, that we will then reduce the amount of tax money that you have to pay so that you can then do this beneficial thing. Egg cooker. If boiled eggs turned out to be a cure for cancer and then the US government wanted everybody to have an egg cooker, you could either have a government program that would supply everybody with an egg cooker. I hope you socialists are listening. And then you wind up with a cheap plastic egg cooker. Or you could tell everybody, hey, we're going to give you a 70%, 80% tax rebate, and then provided you paid more than $40 a year in taxes, then you would qualify to get some money back towards your egg cooker. That's how this all works. And when you have your own money back that you didn't spend, that wasn't taken from you by the government, when you have your money to spend, you buy the stainless steel egg cooker. Okay, same thing now. Let's take a look at solar. If the government realizes that the way to go to get itself off of foreign oil and to move forward into a greener culture to meet those numbers, that they then want to have a large percentage of their population to go solar, then the way to accomplish that, the best way to accomplish that is give them a rebate. In other words, if you then spend the money on something that the government feels is in their best interest, that then they'll simply not take so much from you. It's not your tax money. Let's get that straight right now. It's not your tax money, you know. And most of the people that bring up that argument don't pay taxes. So that's annoying, right? So I hope that clarifies a little better that whole argument of, oh, you know, Tesla and their electric cars or XYZ solar company is, you know, surviving on taxpayer money. That's, in this instance, that's not true. That's how this actually works. What's being done is that the people are then allowed to use their money to buy their best solar system. All right. Now we can go into what the best solar systems are and how good people are about making those decisions. That's something that we're going to go into later, and is actually one of the reasons why we're even doing this in the first place. We want to explain things about what are the dangers with buying Chinese panels. What happens when you buy a Chinese panel versus when you buy a German panel or a South Korean panel, some country that's actually playing by the rules, as opposed to what happens when you source your stuff from China just because it's cheap. But anyway, I don't want to make this video super long. But now let's talk about subsidies, because that's another thing that keeps coming up. You know, the solar industry is subsidized by blah, 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 blah. And then they add up a lot of numbers that come to what seems to be an outrageous dollar amount. And, okay, again, what we're generally talking about are these tax incentives, incentives for the companies now to go into areas to set up their production facilities. And so then they're given things like tax deferment. So in other words, if they'll move into a city, then they won't have to pay property tax on that land for X number of years. Sometimes it's decades. I believe that Tesla, with their Gigafactory, I believe they've got a 25-year deferment on their taxes. Let's put that into perspective. So one of the main reasons why capitalism works is because of just those types of arrangements. Right? If I'm going to build a gigafactory and I'm looking for a place to put it, and I choose to put it in the middle of a friggin' desert, or that's even one area that I'm considering putting that building, now I actually have, I feel, if I'm a business owner, if I'm a head of a corporation like Elon Musk, I feel that I have a great bit of leverage to go ahead and put it there. There isn't anything in the desert right now. That land is not paying, there's nobody there paying property taxes on that land. That's not happening now, period. And it won't happen if I don't put a factory there. Not in 1 decade, not in 2 decades, not in 2.5 decades, not ever. Okay. It is also not going to employ anybody in that state if I don't put it there. That means no state income tax. That means no federal income tax. That means no money being spent in that state because of the income made by those people. Now, I hope that those who don't quite grasp this, I'm hoping that light bulb came on in their head. So now when somebody like Elon Musk says, I'd like to put the largest building on earth in Nevada and employ tens of thousands of people potentially, and yeah, so I hope that kind of puts that whole tax incentive thing back into perspective. And we do the same thing with the oil industry. If the oil industry is going around trying to poke holes in areas and look at the sea bottom and try and figure out, where they might be able to get the next natural gas reserve or oil reserve, the federal government is keenly aware that that represents not only an economic bonus for them, but also potentially represents things like national security benefits to them, And so, yeah, they subsidize that stuff. They subsidize it like crazy. They subsidize it very nearly to the amount that the oil company's profit is. And so that's, those are things to kind of keep in mind when you start talking about tax incentives and subsidies. So it's important to keep those things in perspective. And so it's just interesting to me that we got so many comments about that, and so that's I think that was an important thing to take a look at. So the next thing that I think we should probably take a look at is that Tesla's going out of business, or that Tesla is a scam. Tesla is not going out of business, and Tesla is not a scam. If people are interested in seeing what scams look like, you can probably take a look at, do some research on Terry Weigert and the Vector W2 program, where he built and paraded around a bunch of prototypes that he kept repainting. I don't know how many cars he actually ever really produced, all right? And so then you have Faraday Futures, who they're playing this money game right now, and I give Faraday Future the benefit of the doubt. I won't say that they're a fraud. They built a really nice prototype. They had the best of intentions. They tried to build a plant, but through money mismanagement, they probably didn't succeed. Okay, so the fraud aspect is a little annoying because they're not a fraud. If they were a fraud, I wouldn't have been able to get a Tesla Model S. Hundreds of thousands of people wouldn't have cars. They're not a fraud. The International Space Station, SpaceX, is sending rockets up to the International Space Station. They're actually doing this. They actually have billions of dollars in contracts, not subsidies. SpaceX is supplying a product to NASA that they are, and others, that they are then purchasing this service that SpaceX is providing. So again, these aren't fraudulent endeavors. And as far as the going bankrupt aspect of it, I listened in on the earnings call that Tesla did, and that was actually one of the reasons why I delayed posting this. Was like, oh, there's probably going to be some really interesting information in that people might want to hear. They said that moving forward, that they will not see any more quarters that are not profitable, and that is obviously the result of the release of the Model 3, and now they're trying to grind away at that 400,000 pre-order number, and the orders obviously for the car keep coming in. There's some nuances to that maybe we can discuss if folks are really interested in learning how Tesla is kind of deferring the lower price vehicles so that they can make vehicles now that are the upper end. They have more options, they have the dual motor and all of that, because their gross margins are higher on those vehicles. They can actually make more money on those vehicles rather than producing those $35,000 vehicles that they promised. I know it makes me cringe too. Everybody, I'm sure, has their own opinion on that. And the naysayers are probably wholly justified, but again, Tesla isn't going bankrupt, and they're not going bankrupt for the very reason that they make those hard decisions. It was a tough decision to make. Oh, we're gonna, we said we'd do this $35,000 car, and now we're gonna kind of shove this out. The other reason they're not going bankrupt is they have something to sell. They haven't been making a loss on every vehicle. The people that say that Tesla's been losing money on every vehicle don't understand a concept called NRE, or non-recurring engineering. And non-recurring engineering costs are things like building manufacturing lines or other infrastructure, like the Tesla Supercharger. Tesla isn't going bankrupt. They could sell the current Tesla Supercharger network for billions to Ford or Chevy or anybody else that wanted to simply pick up where Tesla left off. Of course, Ford and Chevy are going to need a battery factory, aren't they? But they could do that and then pick right up, and then Tesla could continue on making batteries or electric motors for vehicles, and quite likely other automotive manufacturers would then buy their product. I think that's probably Elon Musk's dream. I think that if he never made another car so long as he lived, I think he'd be the happiest person on the planet. Because they're a technology company, they're not a car company. So anyway, so let's kind of move on with that, because I know they're not a fraud, and no, they're not going bankrupt. So now here, let me go ahead and pull up a couple of things. We'll move from that into something again fun. So I need your help, actually. I need your help to decide something. Shoot me a comment on what you'd like to see. So yesterday, let me pull this up. With the whole egg cooker incident, I had to figure out where I was going to procure an egg cooker at 8:30 in the morning, and so I looked online to try and see what brick and mortar stores locally might actually have one. And lo and behold, found a kitchen store. After driving to one other place that didn't have them, so wound up driving to the kitchen store, and in the parking lot of that kitchen store was a supercharger. So you can see here by what I've pulled up, the if you look at the second section, the first line where it says "since last charge," that's after I had charged it home. How far did I drive? Well, I drove 41 miles, and the reason I drove 41 miles is first I went to one place that didn't have the cooker that I wanted, and then I wound up finding a place that had it, and drove over there, and that's where the supercharger was. So total distance 41 miles, total use 12.5 kilowatts. Okay, well, so I didn't think anything of it, plugged in the car, and so let me pull up now. I'll pull up the other other chart here, the other photo here. This shows how much charge the car put on itself in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. I just ran in, found the exact egg cooker I was looking for, went back to the car, and there we go. So for those of you who don't quite, don't have any experience with superchargers, that's how fast these things put miles on a car. So by the time I got back, as you can see, I was charging. It had already started to throttle down. That's what it does, is you get close to that 90% mark on your charge. It was charging at 156 miles every hour. That's how many miles of charge, miles driving it'll put on the car, and allows you to kind of look at your how far you could potentially go in the time you're taking your break. It's a good way to kind of do a quick calculation in your head when you stop on a long trip. And it put 42 miles on the car. Well, okay, I used 41.4 miles. So then I drive home, and then we go up and pull up this one. So this is after I'd arrived home after supercharging. 35.2 miles, 10 kilowatts, 10.1. Okay, so now here's my question to you guys. When we do the energy sovereignty project, shall I absolutely not charge anywhere else unless it's an absolute necessity, and so then keep all of that driving pure? Or would you guys like to also see in a daily driving situation what might happen if you happen to be close to either a supercharger or even a high-powered wall charger at what they call them, destination chargers? There are pluses and minuses on both. Obviously, even if I do stop at a supercharger or something like that, I'll keep meticulous records of it. But as you can see, it will reduce the overall amount that we show over the course of the year as driving. I'll be able to show the difference between how much we used in supercharging and how much we used charging off of nothing but sunlight at the house. Or would you like to see me just go ahead and restrict that totally and then not charge anywhere but the house unless I actually went on a trip and had absolutely no other choice? And then we would actually perhaps present that as a fail in the case of, well, you couldn't charge it at home, so therefore now you were forced to obtain X amount of power elsewhere. So let me know in the comment section. Again, I can see reasons for going either way. And so then there was a lot of comments and well-meant criticism and a few questions about the batteries. Why don't we go with something else? A lot of comments about this or that, or why they were delayed. So in June, the Gigafactory just started to ramp up their production. They started to actually produce batteries at the Gigafactory. That's really important, because now what you're looking at is they're not purely getting Panasonic to make their batteries overseas and then ship them to them. Now they have a ready-made percentage of batteries that they are getting from the Gigafactory production. And that's only going to go up and up and up and up. Remember that Gigafactory is designed to double the world's production of batteries. Let me say that again, double it, right? And so when you look at the batteries that they've been purchasing from Panasonic up to this date, Panasonic is making batteries for other people, not just Tesla, right? And so Tesla realized going into this that if they were going to be able to keep up with demand, that they were going to be able to actually have to monopolize that production, right? And the only way to do that was to make an honest assessment of, how many batteries are we going to need? So that's important to remember, that they just started ramping that up, because in conjunction with that, we were told by Sunworks that Tesla is actually delivering the batteries on an allocation basis, very similar to how automotive dealerships distribute cars. You have an automobile dealership, you've sold a certain number of vehicles that quarter, half year, and then that dictates how many vehicles that the manufacturer will send you, and then you'll chew away at that supply. And so it was my mistake, due to some miscommunications between myself and Sunworks, and also a lack of communication between Sunworks and Tesla, really. But it was my mistake that I thought that these batteries were being delivered on line item per order, and they're not. They're not. So Sunworks is going to be receiving an allocation in August of 10 of the Powerwall batteries. Now, they already have 2 that were sent, that were earmarked for our installation. And so then of this additional 10, we're going to get our remaining 4. So it looks like we'll be doing our installation in August. So that clears up one of the things that I was really wondering about. It's like, well, how are they going to be delivering these batteries? It's great that they put it in the hands of the installers, because the installers really are the best ones to figure out who should get their batteries first. If they're ready to go on an install, and they've got somebody else who's still in the planning phase or in the funding phase for their thing, they're going to go ahead and supply the batteries to the clients that are actually ready to install, and that makes sense, and that's a good way of doing business. As to the installation of all 6, that also we got some clarity on that, in that because we're getting all of our batteries, and Sunworks wants to get us our batteries so that even if they're not hooked up, they're on site, they're installed. By hooked up, I mean not integrated into the system, but they're already on site and they're already installed, so then we get our rebate for that. All right, and so that was important to us moving forward, because we'd like to up our game and spend more time on these videos, and that means that myself and others involved in the project would like to spend more time doing this. We haven't had any music on several of the last videos because I've been working, and I would really like to be able to kind of dial that back and be able to produce some more crafty videos for you guys. I think that'd be fun. And part of that is, hey, I gotta pay my bills, so let's go ahead and get those rebates back. So we'll get those installed, and then as far as getting them all communicating, that actually has to do with a device that Tesla provides called the gateway. Now, the gateway is a handler for the batteries that are hooked up to the system and to the utility company, so it is able to talk and figure out how it's going to run its switch. And that's really important if you're planning on doing something like energy sovereignty, where you're going to island your home, where you're planning on powering your entire home on this. And in next week's Prologue update, which again might very well be the last Prologue update we do, we're going to have a couple of Sunworks technicians walk you through the connection of how that goes in a preliminary phase. They won't know until they actually have run a few more numbers on that gateway. But the issue with the gateway is twofold. Firstly, it's a communication issue, but mostly we discovered that it's a power handling issue. So the gateway, in order to hook it up to the utility company, has to be able to handle the same amount of current to and from the utility that you produce. Now, I'm not going to get too technical on it here, but long story short is that eventually that may change. Eventually, if your home is consuming a certain amount of power and only needs the utility to supply a small amount of filler power, then they may change how homes are hooked up. We're hoping to be able to drive that in the future by demonstrating how some of this stuff works. But currently, all the current has to be handled in that way, in and out, through that gateway. Well, so what that means then is that each gateway has to be able to handle the cumulative. Wow, I'm glad I heard that shutter click. Otherwise, that would have been a disaster. I don't know why it kicked off, but I'll review this here shortly. But anyway, so that's about it. So now we have some understanding. We may wind up running 2 or 3 gateways, but ultimately it is still going to be that thing of we're producing a certain amount of current. We're able to deliver a certain amount of that stored energy instantly through the power walls, and because we're able to deliver that amount of power instantly, the grid, because of the way that the utility companies have to run the system, the grid actually has to be able to handle that amount of current. So currently they're looking to see how they can tap into the mains to allow that amount of current from the 6 batteries to connect to the grid. And we'll keep you informed on all of that. Thanks so much for all of your continued comments. Keep them coming. Apologize for the rough edit when the camera shut off. One of the things that I have been trying to do is to make sure that these videos flow. If you want to see that format changed, if I yap too much, maybe we'll do some other clever editing. But from my personal experience, if somebody can't relate information to you in a continuous and honest way, then they probably are searching. They probably don't know what they're talking about. And so, but anyway, so thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy this discussion series, if it's something you want to see more of, like and subscribe. When we get the batteries installed, obviously we'll be starting the Energy Sovereignty Project. Then it will turn into a weekly update series, not so much a discussion series. But if you guys like this Q&A format, then let me know. What we may wind up doing is setting up maybe even a real live feed video where I can answer some of your questions as they roll by. But again, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to keep getting these updates, and I'll see you soon.